in the Czech Republic, and is a training, network and advisory company specializing in the business critical area of order to cash. Callisto Grand and Order to Cash have known each other, companies, for more than 10 years, and we've been formally partnering since 2017. It's a very interesting and exciting time now to be working in Order to Cash. Every company will be under intense focus and pressure. Cash is king, and so on. The COVID-inspired recession, Brexit, rising operational costs, political and economic uncertainty are all happening at the same time. We refer to this as the perfect storm. And if this isn't enough to contend with, today's subject is going to make us all aware of another challenge that's going to impact us in the order to cash area. On that note, I'm going to hand over today to our expert, Mr. Damien Leslie. So, Damien, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I hope everyone can see my screen okay. Yes, I'm Damien Leslie. I'm the head of marketing at Order to Cash. And for those that don't know us, the name kind of says exactly what we do. We're an order to cash automation solution provider. So we offer global solutions either on a technology side or even on a managed services side. And we're happy to be working in partnership with Callisto Grand. So thanks to Mark and Esther and the team for helping to put this session together. But today we're going to be talking about, the title is 2021 and the 3 C's of electronic invoicing. So as we all know, 2020 has been quite a disruptive year, and the global electronic invoicing market has witnessed its fair share of challenges too. So as we near the end of the year, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, with businesses in particular feeling a little lost and unsure as to what the new winds are going to bring. But as we move towards 2021, at least in an e-invoicing sense, some things are holding true. And while, to be honest, we may not like all of these developments, they're happening nonetheless. And the quicker that businesses can get a grip on how to handle some of these initiatives, the better they'll be. But what exactly am I talking about? Well, to put it in a nutshell, what's happening in the world of electronic invoicing is essentially the title of our session today. So the 3 C's of invoicing. So welcome to my tale of clearance, compliance, and complexity. And by complexity, I mean deeper complexity. So sounds exciting, no? I promise I'll explain it all as we go. So for this session, I've taken the idea of the 3 C's model, so developed by Mr. Strategy himself, the Japanese organizational theorist Kenichi Omae, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, that centers around clearance, compliance, and complexity, because those terms can be used as shorthand for what's influencing and shaping the electronic invoicing industry at the moment. So if your project is to have any chance of success, then you need to understand the marketplace, what factors are driving it, and also what rules and regulations that you need to follow to remain compliant, even at a local level. And to be honest, there's a minefield of information out there, and it can be tricky to locate the correct information and plot a safe way through. So my hope is this session will be a slightly educational one for some of you, and it's aimed squarely at those that are looking into adopting an electronic invoicing solution in some shape or form, or those that are currently struggling to make sense of things within this dynamic and honestly rapidly shifting marketplace. But before we take a look at what's to come, let's first try to take a look at where we've come from. So electronic invoicing might be many things, but it's certainly not the new kid on the block. So the technology and the industry that surrounds the practice of electronic invoicing has been in place for decades. So we can't talk of it as being a revolutionary technology any longer. Instead, it's a process that has a firmly established, seasoned, and experienced industry surrounding it. Now, Order to Cash, the company that I work for, previously known as Anacron, has spent the past 20 years at the forefront of this industry, and we've witnessed the market's growth and development firsthand. But while e-invoicing itself can't be considered revolutionary, there is most certainly a revolution happening within the industry at the moment. So I've been with the company for 6 years now, and I've been privy to witness some of the most dramatic upheaval and increased demand that this industry has seen. So this graph uses figures gathered by our friend Bruno Koch over at Valentis, and he's one of the leading independent global advisors and advocates of electronic invoicing. And in his report, if you look at the figures from 2008 up to 2018, then you'll see that essentially the whole industry grew in terms of volume by around about 490%, and with half of that growth attributed to the second half of that decade. But more importantly, we're expecting the industry as a whole to handle 4 times its current volume within the next 5 years alone. So we're long from being peaked yet. So the graph shows the difference in numbers between business to consumer, business to business, business to government, and government to business volume. And it's split between volume sent by supplier to buyer direct against those that use a service provider like ourselves. And the 2 darker lines are the service provider links. But the most dramatic increases are actually occurring outside of the business to consumer market, although the rate of adoption is continuing to rise across all segments. So why is that? And where exactly has this demand come from? And that brings us to the first of our 3 C's, clearance, which refers to the rise of the clearance model and, to be honest, the age of mandatory invoicing. So traditionally, the biggest driver for e-invoicing growth was big business. And the idea of making the switch to electronic invoicing was championed by larger corporations, companies with incredibly high volumes of invoices. And for them, the main drivers for adopting e-invoicing were simple. It gave them a chance to reduce costs, realize cost-cutting targets, and improve efficiency within the process. And in turn, that would help to drive increasing revenues and hopefully limit the number of staff needed to handle menial tasks and print and postage and so on. So help them reduce headcount. And electronic invoicing brings a range of easy benefits: less paper, less postage, less overheads, automated processes, better delivery rates, improved communication with debtors, and lots more. But what hindered the growth of e-invoicing was simply the cost and complexity of adopting an e-invoicing solution, particularly for smaller enterprises. But times have changed, and we need to remind ourselves that governments think and work very similarly to those large businesses, and they have similar needs for efficiency and cost reduction. Right now, business to government mandates are the biggest driver for our industry's growth. Now, governments across the globe have been following the trail led by big business and are making a push towards establishing government and public sector administrations that are paperless, data-driven, and data-focused. And in Europe, we've seen this trend grow significantly in recent years. But what do I mean by mandates? Well, simply that. Governments are mandating, they're enforcing that all invoices, usually on the business to government level, but not more commonly at the business to business level as well now, are to be sent electronically. Now, there are different approaches to these mandates, but there's a model that's gaining a lot of traction, and that's the real-time clearance model. Now, Brazil was one of the first countries to install this kind of clearance model, and it brings an additional governmental priority other than cost reduction and efficiency into play, and it becomes the most predominant decision driver that there is. The clearance model is used primarily with the aim of reducing tax evasion and plugging the VAT gap. And we're seeing a real swing in favor of this clearance model over the traditional post-audit model, where your invoices are checked by the authorities at a later date. And looking ahead, we actually expect to see this type of model, particularly across Europe, come a lot more to the fore. And the reasons for this will become obvious in a moment. But a recent report by, and this is a mouthful, the EU's Directorate General for the Taxation and Customs Union for all member states stated in a report that they published in September of this year that 140 billion euros, or a full 11% of all expected VAT revenue in 2018, went uncollected across the region. Now, those percentages fluctuate for individual countries, with both Romania and Greece as the 2 outliers. However, if you look a little deeper, once you start to look at the terms of the actual monies involved, then Italy is by far the poorest performer, with around 35 billion euros worth of uncollected tax in 2018. Now, that's quite a gap. And it's for this reason, trying to retain this thing that trying to get this tax money back is why Italy have opted for that clearance model. But like I said, the trend started elsewhere. So the leaders for electronic invoicing adoption have always been Latin and Central America. And to some extent, you could add the Nordic countries, I suppose. But Latin America were, to be honest, way ahead of the curve. By 2014, Brazil was already processing more than 90% of all business-to-business and business-to-government invoices electronically. And their countrywide project began as far back as 2011. But the thing that really made people sit up and take note is they were able to generate an additional $58 billion in tax revenue. And once they saw this, then other countries in the region followed suit, like Peru and Mexico. But in 2019 alone, we saw a massive uptick across the region, with Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Uruguay all putting mandates into action. And Colombia have stated that they estimate they can gather 50% more tax revenue by implementing a similar kind of model like Brazil has. And it's figures like that that makes it abundantly clear why this model is seen as preferential at the government level. And the success of Italy's project has made many other countries within the EU sit up and take note as well. So expect this trend to continue and develop fast. And if we look at where this all leaves, let's say the invoice map in 2020, and I'm just going to pop out of here for a second and show you this in a bit more detail. You'll see that the rest of the world is catching on. So every single country on this map shown in blue or orange has some kind of electronic invoicing mandate currently in place. So everything in blue is listed as using a traditional post-audit model, but everything in orange is using a real-time clearance model or is implementing one, just like Brazil. So this is no longer an outlier. It's no longer an exception. It's rapidly becoming the standard approach, and we expect it to be commonplace in the coming years. And if we look at 2019, we saw 15 different countries implement mandates: Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Lithuania, Italy, Kazakhstan, Norway, the Netherlands, Paraguay, Poland, Portugal, Singapore, Sweden, and Uruguay. And in 2020, we expected a further 16 mandates to be introduced, including 9 across Europe. So Chile, Costa Rica, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, India, Malta, Paraguay, Taiwan, Turkey, the United States, and Vietnam. Now, some of these mandates are in pilot stages or currently have limited scope, like in the US, where it refers only to the federal agencies at this point, and they haven't chosen a preferred invoice format standard yet. But others are quite extensive. So in India, for example, business-to-business invoicing has been mandated, which became mandatory as of October. And then there's also Germany, where this month a mandate comes into place for all public, federal, and municipal institutions and administrations. And looking ahead, we already know which projects were postponed in 2020 and that they're going to reactivate either in 2021 or in the near future. And beyond that, we already know that we're expecting updates in Greece with regards to combined reporting for purchase and sales invoices. We know that Italy is about to update their invoice format, the Fattura PA, which will become mandatory on January the 1st. We know that Poland, they wanted to introduce a B2B invoice mandate this year, but they postponed it and we're expecting it to come into play in the summer of next. Serbia, Ecuador, El Salvador, the list goes on. And following on from Singapore's adoption of a European PEPAL style framework, more of that later, then we also seen that Australia and New Zealand are going to roll out a joint approach in a similar fashion in the near future as well. Which brings us, I'll go back to here. Okay, let's think again about what we know or what we knew about invoicing before all these mandates started to appear. So electronic invoicing used to be simple. For many businesses, invoicing solutions were built around email and PDF, sending a digital facsimile of an invoice to somebody's email address. But to be honest, that is no longer a viable solution. And if we're clear about this, the PDF is as it has basically had its day. And if we look back to the graph I showed today, as sent via email and PDF. And although we're expecting the volume within the industry to quadruple within 5 years, I'd actually expect the percentage of truly electronic invoices, so non-PDF invoices made from structured XML data, etc., to increase dramatically more than that. So everything you think you've already solved is about to change. And the clearance model has gained such momentum because it's the invoice itself that is the document that provides the most complete information for tax authorities. And automating, streamlining, and accelerating the audit process helps those governments move towards a real-time, transparent tax monitoring system. But what I find interesting here is that it's the invoice document itself that has become the catalyst and the central focus for much bigger projects. So the invoice used to simply be a means of communication between two parties, a sender and a receiver. But now the accuracy and the clarity of that invoice and the data contained within have become even more critical. And with the clearance model, suppliers and buyers have to send invoice data or reports in electronic format to the tax authorities for real-time validation and auditing. While this provides many benefits for the tax authorities, granted, the clearance system is actually quite complex for all trading parties forced to deal with it. To ensure compliance, all companies need to have their own issuing certificate granted by the tax authority, which they use to electronically sign each and every document. But just because the government demands an electronic invoice, that doesn't mean that the company's internal processes or their efficiency is up to scratch, or that their means of communicating electronically with suppliers and buyers are sufficient, if indeed they exist at all. But the clearance model simply forces companies to play catch up quickly. And in Europe, this has been coming. In 2014, the EU created a directive that outlined a desire to build and recognize a pan-European standard for electronic invoicing. It also stated not everybody made it in time, but it's estimated that this one directive has affected over 100,000 different public administrations and agencies across the region. And this in turn has forced all companies trading with those government and public sector agencies to implement their own solutions in order to meet these new regulations and to continue their mutual business effectively. And that pan-European standard for e-invoicing, well, let's talk about that for a minute. For years, the EU has clung tight to its open PEPL, and by PEPL, it means Pan-European Public Procurement Online. A member of the European what we have is like a large phone book. It's a large directory of names and contacts, all linked via certified access points. And as a business, you need to connect with an access point, for example, a service provider like us, who can send your PEPL compliant, AS4 compliant invoices over that network. And this year, PEPL introduced its AS4 protocol, which was the latest framework that they have, which details the acceptable encoding and formatting that the PEPL network accepts. And this came into operation replacing the AS2 version, and it became a mandatory acceptance requirement for every PEPL access point. Great, this is a step in the right direction. But what's happening in Italy is subverting this push for standardization, because Italy requires an additional handful of mandatory data fields. So this is fragmenting the value of the PEPL standard And if further countries require their own individual makeup, which is entirely plausible, then we could end up with a European situation that mirrors what's happening in Latin America, where standardization is to build and recognize a pan-European standard. But that directive also allowed each member state to select their preferred channel and format, enabling them to determine their own preferred technologies. So instead of creating a pan-European standard, we've got what we didn't want, which is a local stand-up and a local approach and a local setup for each and every member state. And elsewhere, we've seen Singapore, they've adopted a PEPAL-inspired framework as well. Great, let's expand the powers of PEPAL, brilliant. Hang on a minute. They're making their own iterations too. And after Singapore, Australia and New Zealand are doing a PEPAL style approach, but again, they're going to implement their own version of that protocol as well. So that will make 4 different versions of this PEPAL standard. So where's it going to end? Chances are this is only the beginning. Singapore is moving fast. They wanted to eradicate PDF and paper invoicing this year already. And in total, they wanted to make PEPAL compliant invoicing the standard for all businesses. And it's only the pandemic that has forced them to delay their plans until 2022, but it is coming. And now we at Order to Cash and I'm sure other providers are getting responses from many companies acting within that territory that are now scrambling to connect with an access point. So while the PEPAL project was born from great intentions, with everything being decided at a country by country level, we're left with a saddening fragmentation of standards across the industry, which brings us to the last of our 3 C's, complexity, and how complex it is. Now, what businesses have to contend with today is actually quite a staggering level of complexity that, as a sender, you're simply forced to unravel as best you can. There are simply many solutions to the same problem. There's a variety of service providers who all offer different levels of service, including domestic and international support. There are numerous invoice formats and standards. And on top of that, different industries have their own specific workflows, formats, protocols, and standards. So let's not forget the role that the accounts payable or business-to-business channels play in this complexity as well. So different senders or different customers will work with different AP partners. And as a sender, you're forced to deal with multiple business-to-business channels as well. You have to send your invoice in the format that their AP platform accepts. And one customer will have a different AP platform than another. So suddenly, the streamlining and efficiency goals that you associate with electronic invoicing can actually seem pretty hard to obtain. And the truth is, standardization around electronic invoicing has never been as straightforward as one would hope for. And the fact of the matter is, there are many different standards in operation globally. And if you're working internationally, chances are you're going to have to familiarize yourselves with a lot of them. Now, invoice channels are like highways. In theory, they make everything travel faster, but there are several rules that you have to follow. And if you're not careful, then things can grind to a halt pretty quickly. And you know as well as I do that if invoices don't get delivered, then they don't get paid. And far too often, the rules of the road change as well. So wherever you look, you're going to find different variations of the same theme. I'll give you a few more examples. A government wants to create a central access point to verify and clear all their invoices. Great. They also choose a preferred format. Wonderful. And create their own communication guidelines. Great. Great idea. And in theory, all of these initiatives should make it easier to communicate. They should make it easier to do business. They should make the process easier to monitor, maintain, and control. But all of these initiatives are geared to help streamline activities and processes at a government level. And what this results in is a greater level of complexity for you, the buyers and suppliers affected by these mandates. And it's a complexity that you just have to solve without question. You don't have a choice. And particularly, if you conduct business in multiple territories, well, then just multiply this situation by how many territories that you have. And let's look in detail a bit more at these 4 different setups. In Germany, their business to government invoicing mandate comes into play this month. So I hope people are ready for it. And they have a preferred format, the Ex-Rechnung. So far, so good. But it also looks like they're going to accept a Zugföd 2.0 format, which the federal agencies have been plugging for a couple of years. So they have two formats. And they've also built a central portal, the e-Rechnungs portal, which is to be used by all federal institutions. But then the local regions, the landers, they've been allowed to determine how they wish to handle things. And so from what we can gather, some of them are going to use the e-Rechnungs portal, others are going to build their own, and some others, to be honest, from what we're aware, haven't even thought about whether they will or won't, and haven't even begun planning for it. So good luck unraveling that one if you can. In Brazil, sorry, just to go back a second, in Brazil, where this all began, they've actually got one of the most intricate setups that we've seen. And every invoice needs to be cleared by the appropriate regional tax authority. And this can be on a buyer or a seller side. And so one invoice you send might have to be cleared in Sao Paulo, and the next one might have to be cleared in Buenos Aires, for example. But all of them must go through a certified government affiliated partner. And there's only a few of those. So if you're looking to send stuff there, you need to find someone who can work with one of those partners in order to get things done. Hungary, they're going full steam ahead. So much so that I think even they're struggling to keep up with themselves. So in October, they announced that their new invoice format, the XML Schema 3.0 XSD, will be introduced from January the 1st. But the thing is, this comes just 3 months after they launch version 2.0. And the special feature of that new update is that this new XML schema has been further developed so that it can now be considered as an electronic invoice. And in addition to this, they say from version 3.0 onwards, which means there are more iterations to come, invoices from community transactions, export transactions, and sales to private individuals must also be reported electronically. And then we recently heard from France. So they've been in lockdown all year, but they've been thinking. And they've recently announced that they want to make electronic invoicing mandatory on a B2B level by 2023 and have all invoices sent electronically at latest by 2025. So hopefully you can see why I called this current situation a tale of clearance, compliance, and complexity. As more countries are adopting their own clearance models, we're seeing standardization set at the local level, and that's resulting in a deeper complexity that you as a sender need to unravel. You need to familiarize yourselves with the many standards, formats, and regulations you need to adhere to if you want to remain compliant and ensure that you can conduct business efficiently. Now, that's no easy task. And it should be painfully clear by now that if you're running a corporate electronic invoicing project, you can't focus on domestic solutions alone. PDF is dead or is dying. And this is especially true for larger corporates and mid-sized enterprises. But even some SMEs should start to consider their international solutions, particularly in the business to consumer area. And while it's true to say that many larger companies have already been sending invoices to customers, both domestically and abroad, in electronic formats for a decade or more, the main format was, and still is in many cases, a PDF file. Sometimes we see enhanced structural data as defined by the invoice user and an AP platform that can be included. But this is changing. And the rise in adoption of AP networks like Ariba, Tradeshift, Basware, Tungsten Network, etc., shows that the corporate sector is starting to embrace new, truly electronic formats. But what's interesting, essentially, they just shifted that complexity over to the suppliers and the senders. And what has brought a solution for purchase to pay has created a significant order to cash or accounts receivable challenge. And the sharp increase in the number of mandates that are appearing is forcing you all to consider and implement an electronic invoicing project of a totally different scale than what you thought about previously. And in most cases, The receiver of the invoice defines the format or other legal requirements that need to be in place to validate the invoice. And these can force international suppliers to not only convert the invoice data itself, but also to process and archive those invoices on servers in the country of destination. And it's here where many businesses start to come unstuck, because their in-house IT staff and legal staff can no longer guarantee to fulfill the compliance requirements of customers abroad. So, how can we begin to make sense of all of this? Well, the first thing I would say is just don't be afraid to ask for help. So the level of complexity within today's electronic invoicing landscape is unfortunate and in some cases unnecessary to my mind, but it's clear that some issues could have been avoided. But I understand, and you too must accept, that the complexity is not going to unravel anytime soon. You've got to understand that your delivery requirements have changed, and in many ways you as a sender are no longer solely in charge of that decision. One size can no longer fit all. Your systems need to become much more flexible and capable of communicating in different methods. And let's be honest, most ERPs and bookkeeping software packages are ill-equipped to handle this sort of thing, and they're certainly not agile enough to handle things quickly. Your internal processes are built around the simple idea of straightforward communication between yourselves and the buyer. But now you have many customers that are demanding you send invoices through their preferred AP channel. Or you have a government agency that demands you connect with their channel. And in countries like Italy and soon to be Portugal and Poland, you have to connect with a governmental channel for clearance before you can even deliver an invoice to a buyer. And then what if the receiver on the back end also has a preferred channel? Okay, I'll stop there. You can see how complicated this gets. And it's this complexity why companies of all sizes are having to look towards service providers like ourselves, because no matter how flexible your own internal business practices are, you simply are going to need help in order to find a beneficial, cost-effective solution that's both manageable and adaptable, as well as one that can be turned around in a pretty decent timeline. Because connecting to a channel is only one step. You need to map out the workflow for each and every receiver that you work with and try and adhere to all of their requirements. So a benchmarking survey from the magazine Credit Today found that on average, businesses they contacted were forced to connect with 12 different AP portals on average. We see similar numbers amongst our own customer base, in fact, in some cases more. But the cost for them to handle all of these connections is vast. So the invoice costs can soar to around €25 per invoice, with processing costs of around 12 and manual data entry fees. They literally have people logging online and entering invoice data into a form in order to get it through. So you need to understand your current business situation in detail. You need to understand what channels do you need or are mandated to connect to, which countries and territories, what channels would be helpful to connect to, and are there any specific industry-focused standards you need to support? And how many specific customer requirements do you encounter on top of that? And in theory, or should I say on paper, building a connection doesn't seem that complicated, but in practice, it can often turn into something else entirely. First, you've got to make contact with the channel itself. Explain to them that you have a receiver who uses their channel and that you need to prepare a connection in order to invoice them correctly. You then need to examine the channel's list of delivery requirements. What format does the data need to be in? How is that data string created? And then you need to ensure that you can replicate the format in your ERP system. Chances are you can't, as it stands. Then you've got to contact the receiver themselves to ensure that you understand all of their specific requirements behind the AP portal. And you also have to recheck the requirements of both parties against any government or local legislation that exists to see if there's any additional fields you need to add in there. And essentially, through what is usually a trial and error system, you eventually get to a place where you've built your connection, you've tested it completely end to end, you get everything up and running, and you think, great, everything works. And then they release a new protocol or another technical upgrade, or the customer requires additional information, or they change provider and the whole thing starts again. The project never ends. And it's the maintenance of these platforms and connections that is pretty much a constant. It's an ever-running project. And my question to you is that why would you burden yourselves with all of this? You're not experts in it. You're not kind of clever. And why keep pushing yourself through this? Establishing a data connection with an AP platform or a business to government network usually involves that trial and error system, and it involves a lot of testing, and it's a hefty IT exercise that you need to make sure that you're prepared to handle. And judging by the projects that we've undertaken and those that our customers and partners have made us aware of, it can take anywhere between 4 and 6 months to realize a connection with an AP platform. And in some cases, it can be longer. Now, that is a costly endeavor, both in time and resources. And it's almost always a project that is outside of your normal budget and resource planning. So these connections can cause a strain on companies' finances. And more importantly, the longer it takes to get the connection set up, the longer you're going to delay your business. And you could end up stifling your order pipeline. And if that continues for a length of time, no matter what business you're in, you're going to feel the impact of that. And if your company is about to venture into these waters, please don't go in unprepared. The invoicing process is of critical importance to any business. Improving your connectivity will help you focus on the business of doing business. So ask for help. Look for a provider who can help you to unravel this complexity. And from an outbound invoicing point of view, make sure you do your preparation well. Know your own environment, know your requirements, and phase your project to make it manageable and achievable. But when you're looking for a supplier, search for one who is focused on interoperability and can guarantee global compliance. And I would suggest you follow the same guidelines we do. Prepare right, evaluate all requirements, configure everything, and ensure that you can structure the data in a way that's workable. And understand the flexibility that your provider offers. So your preferred partner should be able to offer extensive, multi-format, multi-channel, multi-language support. And your goal is essentially to future-proof your invoicing process, but you also need to provide continuous support to all receivers while you're doing that. So be aware of what channels and formats you want and need to support today, and which ones you need to add in future. And your invoice provider needs to be able to deliver invoices on your behalf across a range of roaming networks. Your solution must be able to satisfy the needs of your demanding customers by being able to deliver the invoices in the format that they request. And this makes it easier for them to conduct business with you, and in turn makes it easier for them to pay. Available to you, and be sure to let your customers know which options are available to them. So ideally, your provider should work like we do, but you are in charge of your master data. It's your responsibility to deliver accurate customer and invoice data and present that data in an acceptable XML format. And then you can let the provider handle the rest. Data transformation and invoice presentment, complete audit trail tracking, roaming connectivity and maintenance, full archiving and payment tracking, and international payment options, acceleration features, and much more. So at Order to Cash, one of our aims is to create the largest invoice interoperability network that there is. We want our customers to be able to invoice anywhere at any time in any requested format or through any mandated channel. We're here to eliminate the complexity, guarantee compliance, and improve your connectivity to help you focus on the business of doing business. Now, the benefits of e-invoicing are real and they're valuable. And if you steer your project correctly, you'll quickly be able to shift your entire invoicing process online and be able to process diverse payment types, integrate seamlessly into SAP or other ERP systems, payment platforms, and invoice channels. Entire order to cash cycle with ease. So just tread carefully, prepare well, and understand your requirements. But also remember to keep in mind how your invoice flow fits into your whole order to cash cycle. It's the most important document in the entire cycle, so ensuring that it's generated, presented, and delivered in a fully compliant manner can really help you to improve your cash flow and improve satisfaction level with customers. It can help you to conduct business faster and more easily with each and every customer worldwide. And if you'd like to know a bit more about order to cash or see some examples of how we can help some of the world's leading brands accelerate their order to cash processes, please feel free to reach out. And perhaps we could arrange a follow-up session with Callisto Grand if there's enough interest to show you a bit more about stuff in detail, or to give you some case studies, for example. Now, I'd like to thank you all for listening to me today. I do hope you found it of interest and not too scary, but I do wish you all well with your own projects. It is a complicated world out there, but perhaps by working together, we can make it a little easier for everybody. So, thanks again.
I think that was that really was a very, very good presentation this morning. We're grateful for you taking the time today. We've got 3 questions here. First one is there a single EU entity that manages all the B2G interfaces?
No. No, everything is completely ad hoc. Your best bet is to go to someone like ourselves who's got I think it's the CEF website. There's a database there which gives you an overview of what's happening in each country within the EU and who's managing, which authority is managing each platform, but it's quite hidden in the way to point you in the right direction, but there isn't one place that's handling everything.
Excellent. Next question was, how would an invoice provider or companies such as yourselves deal with manual invoicing?
By manual invoicing, do we mean kind of inputting data into things, or maybe you need to explain that term?
I think so, yeah. I think it's really just
well, from our side, we try to not do that. We'd rather build data connections and do everything automatically. The idea of having a manual process in the center of things goes against what we're set up to do. I mean, there have been some very specific examples where we know of things that have happened, but from our point of view, we're all about automation. So we take it on our time to kind of build those connections, to open them up to all of our customers and to send everything automatically.
I think if I could perhaps extend that question, is something that's coming up quite a lot now, like where companies are still producing paper invoices, or indeed take paper invoicing just away somewhere, like say in the next 5 to 10 years, it will almost disappear.
Yeah, I think that's the focus of most of these initiatives, is to get rid of that paper trail. From our point of view, like I say, we give you the option. We still, as much as we're focused, still requires a printed invoice, we can facilitate that, and we have an electronic archive of electronically, and then it can be sent to a print partner afterwards. And we do see, particularly for most of our customer base, has a very low electronic percentage and quite a high print percentage, but that is changing. And this B2B mandate that they've just announced, and it's literally in the past couple of weeks, is deliberately there to change all of these things. So, I mean, as we go forward, I think the existence and the acceptability from a tax point of view of a paper invoice is definitely going away.
Lovely, thank you. Another question, is the Workday ERP within the scope of order to cash company?
that sounds like it's a particular format in a certain country. Am I correct?
I'm not actually sure. So it was just it's not an ERP I've heard of before. But
if it's an ERP system, essentially we are connected with, I think, over 700 different ERP systems at the moment. So what I normally say to people, and I'm not the main technical person in the company, I live in marketing after all. But what we normally say is, unless it's something that you've custom built yourself, or you're the only company in the world that's using this thing, then chances are we've probably built a connection, or we have some experience in being able to connect with that. But I mean, we connect with like a very broad range of ERP and bookkeeping systems, whether it's the big players like SAP and Oracle, or Microsoft Dynamics, all the way down to some kind of custom. But we have customers that use their own custom ERP systems, and what we'll do that, it just takes a bit longer to connect, so we'll just build a bespoke connection for that. But whatever your ERP system is, chances are we could incorporate it.
Okay, the questions are still coming. This is fantastic, so thank you. Another question is, I think it's compatibility with companies' AP portals as well. That this is all part of the scope as well. It's all part of the roaming.
Yeah.
process.
So I think I've got I have a slide already with AP portals on. We have a very extensive network of AP portals. So whether it's Basware, Tungsten, Tradeshift, kind of SAP Ariba, like I think there's about 40 or 50 we're currently connected with. So pretty much everything on this list and more we're connected with. So Basware, Tungsten, Tradeshift, Simpler Invoicing, some more specific ones like for industries like the oil and gas industry, so Chevron, Oildex, Oxy, those kind of things. There's quite a lot. So I don't know which ones whoever it is referring to, but we have quite an extensive list.
Right. Okay. Lovely. That's all the questions. There was one suggestion which you touched on it towards the end there, Damien, that are coming on stream and so on going forward. And also in terms of webinars and presentations, we'll certainly be doing more on this because it is such an important subject. And I know once we finish today, we're going to talk about scheduling other events going into next year. And a comment was which I think would be of great interest and value to everybody here today.
Yeah, we'd be happy to put something like that together. We've already done stuff with Callisto Ground in the past with PPG, for example. So we can put some of those together. It's very, of course, we don't want to keep you for too long. So this was more of an educational session, but yeah, we'd be happy to show you a little bit more of what our customers are doing. Also, after this session, we're going to send you all the slides from today. And at the back of the presentation, you'll see there's a list to some recommended reading. So there's the independent report from Valentis. If you're interested, we could send you that at a later. An idea of some of the type of customers that we work with and what we do with them as well. So there's going to be a lot of stuff coming to you, but please, if there's anything in particular that you would like to hear from us or want us to cover in future, then please just reach out.
Can you take one more question? They're still coming, which is great. The question here is, does the system allow the way back, like getting the purchase order from the customer into the ERP?
We have done, we don't currently have I would and sometimes we've done in the ERP, and then we pick up everything from that point on. But it's worth having a discussion with us to see what kind of setup you're talking about as to whether we can incorporate that.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks. I think we're pretty well done. I just had a message sent here as well that one company, a shared service center in Hungary, is actually going on this journey at the moment. So
I imagine they're tripping over themselves at the minute.
Yeah, and we'll so I think there's at least one case study we can reach out to on that. So
yeah.
Damien, again, thank you very much indeed. It has been a really fascinating presentation today, scaring the what's it out of all of us, I think, as well, because it's something else we got to deal with going forward. But essential that we're aware of this. I think just to wrap up, then, everybody to stay in touch, connect to the LinkedIn for Order to Cash, and indeed our own as well, Callisto Grand. We're regularly putting out information on this and other business related topics as well, both of us. So we'll call it a day there. Again, thanks very much. We'll be in touch. Take care, stay safe, and speak to you all very soon.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, thanks again for letting me scare the bejesus out of people. Always a pleasure. But yeah, thanks again for the opportunity, Mark. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. And take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Damien. Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.